Hi, this is Warren Sprouse. It's Sunday night. It's about 8 o'clock here on a Sunday evening, so we're together. We're going to be together for the next couple of hours. This is the Bible Forum, and we're here every Sunday evening from 8 until 10 p.m., looking at life through a biblical lens and generally solving all the world's problems in 2 hours or less. We want you to be involved in the process here, so we I just touched a piece of paper and it flipped off the desk. I have no idea what it said. So we want you to be at your post. You are there or you wouldn't be watching this, although some of you may be watching this later on via YouTube. But we're here live every Sunday night from the website, thebibleforum.net. There's a video screen there. You can watch it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Or you can go to the YouTube page and see stuff that went on weeks, months ago to your heart's content. We also have a number of blogs that we want you to access. We'd love for you to subscribe to. As I write these things, you would get them in your inbox. You would have them immediately. One of those websites is called The View from Zawar. It is a blog referencing the end of days, the idea that Lot and his daughters were there on the plain of Zawar as they watched God destroying Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities of the plain. And we, I believe, are in that same situation as Christians, believing what the Bible has to say, looking at the events that are occurring in our world through that biblical lens. We are like Lot. We get a chance to watch this destruction from a distance. I have written recently a blog entitled Get God Out of Our Lives, and you need to go over there and take a peek at that. We may talk about that a little bit later on. Also have a website called trybiblicalcounseling.net. And there we talk about life issues and counseling type issues. Haven't written anything in the last week or so. Do that periodically as things come up. I have a number of issues or articles, information that I'm accumulating relative to this affluenza disorder that the psychological community has latched onto, and talk a little bit about that. Also have a website called livinggodly.net, and there we talk about how it is that God intends for his people to live godly lives. Very important subject matter. But here at the BibleForum.net, this past week I wrote on how the Pope wants more dialogue. He's asking for all of the religious types of the world, he names 4, to get together so that we can talk about the things that we have in common. We're actually going to talk about that later on this evening, but that's at the BibleForum.net. Last week I wrote about the stench in the nostrils of God. I wanted to talk about it last week, but we ran out of time. It is relative to the church. We look around at the world, we see how the world is coming unglued. Men and women are doing all sorts of terrible things, but that isn't what really upsets God. It's his church. It's that his church is doing the same sorts of things, that his church believes now these silly doctrines and some of the other stuff. You might argue that his church really doesn't. But the church that is established in his name does. And so we talk about ecumenism and we talk about liberalism, we talk about some of the things that are going on today. And it's an interesting read. I also send out an email every Saturday. I had an awful time doing it this Saturday. It took all day. And I don't know if it was Time Warner Cable here on my end, or whether it was the company that I use to send these out, but we just couldn't make it work. And I kept walking away and letting it settle down, go back and sign back in and try again, and it literally took about 8 hours to get that to work. But it looks like this when it comes out. It's got a picture of me, and then it usually has pictures of other things and people, articles and things, and I want you to have that. And so if you will send me your email address, I will make sure you get one of these every Saturday. That's all I send out. Unless I have something really emergency-like that I think is critical and you need to know it. And I've done that once in 5 years since I've been doing this. And that had to do with Adobe Flash Player because you couldn't get my video anymore. Those of us who had upgraded Adobe the way they told us to wouldn't get the stream. And so I went online and I spent several hours doing the research and playing around and going to other computers. I use Apple, going to some PCs that I know about and seeing if it would work there and finding a way to go back and get an older version of Adobe that would work. And I did that for you. And I sent out an email. I'm not sure it worked. The comments I got back was, what? I don't know what you're talking about. And in about 2 or 3 days, the problem went away anyhow. But I would love for you to get this email. If you have a pastor, send me his email address. I have a ministry to pastors called Rod and Staff. And in fact, I'm getting ready to send out an email this week to pastors. I have a list of pastors in 4 different states, and I try just to send them something monthly to encourage them. It's just an effort to give them information, help them, encourage them, not asking anything of them. And if you know of any pastors, let me know. Give me the addresses, and I'll put them on my list. I told you last week about this program that Disney has out where you can buy into, it's a little box like Roku or Apple TV or something of that nature, and you can control what is being produced in your house for phones and iPads and iPods and computers and all the rest of it. You can control it per appliance. So that you have smaller children, you don't want them accessing everything, you can control for that, but it wouldn't be for you. You can set a bedtime where after this point they get nothing, all of these kinds of things, and it filters. I thought it was a pretty good program, even if it was Disney. It's called My Circle, and you can go online and you can look it up and find out. It does cost a few shekels. I think it's 40 or 50 bucks. But if I had children with devices, as they say, I would be looking into that. We also have our Bible Institute up and running. Some of you have signed up. There have been a number of folks who have communicated with me in the last week or so. If you have done that, you already have received the first lesson. You got that last Monday. Some of you didn't get it till Tuesday or Wednesday because that's when you communicated with me. But we're studying through 10 major doctrines of the Bible under the heading of Bible Institute of Charleston.org. There's a link on the website where you are now, thebibleforum.net. But you can also go directly, Bible Institute of Charleston.org, and you can click around and see just exactly what we're doing, how we're doing it. There is a cost. It's minimal. It just pretty much covers the cost of doing business. It isn't exorbitant. And every Monday I send out a video, and it's about 45 minutes in length. There are 5 of them in the first lesson, which is the doctrine of bibliology. And there will be at least 5, maybe 6 in each of the other 9 doctrines. We have produced bibliology and theology proper. We're working on Christology, the doctrine of Christ. But we're going to work through all 10 of these doctrines. And you need to be a part of that. What else are we doing? Oh, I'm writing a book. It's going to be a short book, probably won't be more than 50 or 60 pages, 4 or 5 chapters, writing about church history. This the article that I wrote that I said entitled "The Stench in the Nostrils of God" relative to the church stimulated me to go back and to educate you, my audience, as to what church history is all about, how we got where we are, and to see the cycles, because they keep cycling around. And what I think it will do is to help you understand how the devil is attacking and what he has done over the last 2,000 years. He's not very creative. He's far more creative than I am, but he has hit upon something that works, and he continues to work that system just every so many hundreds of years. It circles back around. We get the same problem all over again. The first chapter, I think, is entitled "Everything Old is New Again." And I tell you this, it's going to be down the road. I'm trying to do a chapter a week. That's not going to happen this week because of Rod and staff and because of the Bible Institute. But I'm hoping that over the next couple of months that'll come together and the book will be available. But for some of you, if you want, communicate with me, email me, and as I write a chapter, I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you in a PDF format so that you can open it and you can read it and you can tell me what's wrong with it. Or you can tell me what's right about it. You can correct my spelling. Spell checker does a lot of that. But every once in a while, usually it's syntax, and sometimes we spell the right word, but it's in the wrong place. It doesn't belong, or maybe it's a good word, but there's too many and it doesn't belong there. And after I've read it 14 times, I need somebody else to read this. I've got 3 or 4 gals who are doing this right now. If you'd like to do that, let me know. And when the book comes out, I'll make sure that you know, and I'll make sure you get a copy. How's that? We have a lot of things to talk about tonight, more perhaps than we have time for. We ran out of time last week. We may actually do that again this week. I hope not. But I wanted to, there's a number of articles, a number of issues that popped up this week that really didn't find a home anywhere in a bigger venue, but I wanted you to be aware of them. One of the things, and it has to do with this transgender issue. There were 2 states in the last week or so, New York State, I think, and Washington State, or maybe it was just Seattle City. They passed a law, and basically what it says is that if a biological male were to walk into a women's changing room at a gym, for example, and you were in charge and you stopped them and said, "Oh, excuse me, I think you're going into the wrong place." If that person were to then tell you that they identify as that other gender, from that moment on, if you hindered that person in any way, that male person, from being involved with females in the locker room, in the lavatories, or wherever it might be, it would be a crime. According to the legislation, businesses must have the same uniform for men and for women. If a restaurant requires women to wear skirts, the men must now also. Does that make sense to anybody? Sex stereotyping in businesses is prohibited. This means companies that permit female employees to wear makeup and jewelry must also allow the men to do it. And we're talking about men who identify as women. Joseph Blackholm, executive director of Family Policy Institute in Washington, said, quote, "To my knowledge, this is the first time in the country that there's been a statewide effort to mandate all public accommodations cooperate with the gender identity concept that somebody declares." And keep in mind, they don't have to be physically, biologically, emotionally. They don't have to be that other gender. They just have to identify as that particular gender. You get a picture of where we're headed. I also ran across an article in the Times of Israel that I entitled, "Have We Lost Our Minds?" This was a published report just this week on January the 7th. Secretary of State John Kerry said that Iran may be, quote, days away, end of quote, from complying with last summer's nuclear deal, a step that would compel the United States and other Western nations to immediately suspend any sanctions on the Islamic Republic. The landmark could usher in a new phase in the budding U.S.-Iranian rapprochement, he said. He also told reporters that he spoke earlier in the day with Iran's foreign minister, Mohammad Javed Zarif, who made it clear that the Iranians intend to satisfy their nuclear obligations as rapidly as possible. The Obama administration, Kerry said, is prepared to move on that day on the nuclear-related sanctions on Iranian oil, banking, and commerce that it promised to end as part of the July agreement. Have they lost their mind? Everybody above the age of 7 years has probably seen or heard how Iran has violated this thing, has thumbed their nose at us and it, and is going full steam ahead to just dominate the region. And we're saying, no, they've been good little boys and girls, and they've done everything we've asked, and we have no reason why we won't turn loose their $150 billion that's locked up. Watch out. A new Pew Research Center study has revealed that millennials are becoming more skeptical of religious organizations as well as the news media. That's not news. According to Charisma News, the new study revealed that only 55% of millennials now believe churches and other religious organizations have a positive impact on the country. I would agree with that. How about you? The churches that exist today, the vast majority of the churches that exist today, are not having a positive impact on the country at all. But the statistic that says 55% is a higher number than we've ever had before. Millennials' view on the media have also undergone a change since research was conducted in 2010. 4 in 10 millennials say that the media had a positive impact on the country compared to only 27% now. 2010 it was 40, today it's 27. The media is doing this to themselves. Goes on to say, although millennials' views concerning religious organizations have changed, older generations' views have not. The older generations also tend to view the media negatively, and it seems as older you are, the more likely you will see it in a negative way. Only 26% of both Generation Xers and members of the silent generation, as well as 23% of baby boomers, believe that the media has a positive impact on the country. Under the heading of Dreams Can Come True, Jimmy Kimmel took his camera and microphone out on the streets in New York last week and began to ask grown-up people who looked to be at least in their early 20s all the way up into their 40s and 50s. I said New York, he's in California, but out on the street in California, to ask the people passing by if they felt like North Korea should be congratulated for their successful hydrogen bomb test. And they all said, absolutely. Absolutely. The questioner says, the idea of North Korea having a hydrogen bomb would be somewhat alarming to those of us who are here on the West Coast. that didn't seem to impress them at all. It wasn't anything that... If they couched this in a very positive way, the people were very quick not only to say yes to anything he wanted them to say yes to, but to add their own over-the-top congratulations and all the rest of it. This is what passes for the average American on the street today. They haven't got a clue as to what's going on. Not a single clue. A week or so ago, I mentioned in passing, we didn't have a chance to talk about it, but you have probably seen or heard of it, how that some of these charismatic preachers are upset that the media and others, people like me, do not believe that they should have these $300-400 million airplanes. We don't understand why they have to have their own private jet. Well, just in the last week, our friends Kenneth Copeland and Jesse Duplantis were sitting at the table with their coffee and having a little Bible study, as they call it. And they were talking about this very thing. Jesse was getting ready to discuss something that had happened to him while he was flying in his private plane. And Kenneth Copeland wanted to interrupt. He said, let me interrupt you here. He says, you couldn't have done that on an airliner. Jesse had talked about how the God had spoken to him as he sat in his own private aircraft, and that he had motivated him or said to him that he wanted him to pray, and he had to stand up, and he began to stand up and to pray aloud and in response to what God had said and so forth. He initially it was, what did you say, Lord? Oh, okay, yeah. And all the rest of it. And Kenneth stopped him to indicate that on a public conveyance, on a standard airliner, you couldn't do that. You would stand up and start talking to God, and the guy sitting over there would say, what do you think you're doing? You can't do that. Sit down. And they would call somebody to come because you would be out of order. He went on to say how important this whole discussion is, because those of us that are just now coming into these things, he says, in the first place, Jesse and I and others, and he mentioned Keith Moore and Creflo Dollar, and then said all of them, are traveling around the world. The world is in a terrible shape, and we have a tremendous ministry that's worldwide, and we couldn't get to these places if it wasn't for private aircraft. The mess that the airliners are in today, he says, I would have to stop. And he says, and I'm being very conservative. At least 75 to 80, more like 90% of what we're doing would have to cease because you just can't get there from here in the time frame that it needs to be. And that's why we're on that airplane. We can talk to God. He says, when I was flying for Oral Roberts, one of the pastors there, who was his boss, was on the plane, and he says, now, Kenneth, this is sanctuary, the plane. It protects the anointing on Brother Roberts. And he says, you keep your mouth shut. You don't talk to him, Brother Roberts, unless he talks to you. Because when he's on a meeting, he doesn't talk to anybody but God. This is over the top to me. I'm sure it's basic information to them. But they're looking at you and me and others on commercial airlines, and he says, we live in a dope-filled world. We get in a long tube with seats in it, and we're in there with a bunch of demons. It's deadly. There was a time when pastors felt like that was a mission field. They would get on a plane and travel places, and they would pray about the person who would sit next to them, that they would have the opportunity to share the gospel with that person. These guys are so wrapped up in their relationship with God, God speaking to them, angels doing something or other, or other, I don't know. They can't be out there. They can't be out there with you and me. They've got much more important things to do than to talk to you and talk to me. Does that sound about right? In another article later on, it said that where Kenneth Copeland pastors, they've had an outbreak of measles among children. They've actually had to set aside rooms and bring medical people in to give shots to the kids. It seems that Brother Kenneth has been talking down against inoculating children. He says he didn't actually tell people not to do it, but you can hear him, can't you? It's a fascinating. I don't want to be raising children nowadays. I have a great grandchild just born last week, a week or two ago, and that's the second one. And my granddaughter said that they struggle. Do we give them the shots or do we not? You know, they don't know. And I think they've opted so far to do it. When we were raising our children back in the dark ages, we didn't know any better. We just did it. And you know what? Don't remember a whole big slew of problems that came out of that. Not saying they didn't. We didn't know about them, which means they didn't rise to the level where the world paid a whole lot of attention to it. But millennials are living in a very self-centered world. And if there are 8 people who have a problem with something, whether it's a shot or whether it's you, the world has to stop so it can be fixed. That 10% of the population of the world, which is a big number, would have a problem with something didn't used to rise to a level that we would even hear about it. That's something to do with our 24-hour news cycle and all our technology gadgets. But what I'm saying is, as bad as it is that your child would have a problem, in the scheme of things, get a grip.